Hey, called me a disgrace. Said I was a cautionary tale, the daughter who flew too high, then vanished in shame at Christmas. They'd set a plate for my sister's dog, but not for me at my niece's graduation. They handed out programs with everyone's name but mine. And when my mother told the neighbors I was some kind of clerk, she said it with that smile, the kind that pretends to pity while cutting straight through your spine. The truth. I never stopped working. I just disappeared because that was the only way to stay alive. They thought I gave up, but the only thing I gave up was needing their approval. So when my sister's new boyfriend came to that family barbecue, tall square, jawed in a crisp agency polo, and glanced at me like I was just background noise, I didn't flinch until he froze. He squinted, Step Deputy Director of the FBI Sharp. Ma'am, I served under you in Langley. My name is Evelyn Sharp, and I've worn many hats in the military, including soldier, analyst, strategist, and director of a division that the public never hears about. Before I tell you my story, I want to make sure you're here with me. My mother's face turned pale, and my father's beer bottle froze in midair. No one knew what to say because the daughter they let go was the director who outranked them all. Leave a simple hi in the comments to let me know you're listening, or tell me where you're watching from. I'm inspired by the impact my story may have, and if you find solace in it, please consider subscribing. Subscribing allows tales like mine, stories of strength hidden in quiet, to be heard. Much obliged. Now, allow me to elaborate. As I sat in my Arlington, Virginia, apartment, illuminated by the soft light of my desk lamp, the only sound that could be heard was the distant hum of traffic outside, muted by the glass and the distance between us. Next to me, in the drawer, rested an old FBI badge, which I hadn't worn in years and had covered with a scarf. Tonight, the light caught the badge just so, as if it were daring me to remember. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and a single line appeared on the screen, alerting me that Fiona would be honored at the federal recognition ceremony. It's your dad's 35th anniversary of service, and your mom wants you to attend, Gayla. Excuse me, but I'm simply sending you a message. Pristine. Like a forecast Harold Sharp, a member of the Sharp family, formerly advised Homeland Security on counterterrorism, and I gazed at the screen for what felt like an eternity before closing the phone. Among my relatives, my mother Margaret was a highly esteemed high school teacher who had several accolades to her credit. My sister Fiona, a legal genius and a federal prosecutor, was like a hymn in our family's talks. Lastly, there was me. Evelyn Sharp, the one nobody spoke about anymore, I got my start in the justice system, rose rapidly through the ranks, and eventually switched to the bureau after ensuring that my record was spotless. My instincts sharper than most. But after the Chicago incident, what the press called a tragic hostage negotiation turned fatal. Everything changed. They said I froze, that I gave the wrong call, that someone died because of me. My parents never asked for my side. They never questioned the headlines. They didn't scream, they didn't scold, they just stopped including me no more. Sunday calls, no seat at Thanksgiving. My stocking disappeared from the mantelpiece. I vanished without anyone needing to say the words, but they never knew the real story. I wasn't fired, I wasn't demoted, I was reassigned quietly off the books, brought into a shadow unit reporting directly to the Attorney General. I led Sentinel, one of the most classified operations in our domestic intelligence history. And I led it well, but I couldn't tell them that. Not then, not ever. I stood and faced the mirror, taking in the lines around my eyes, the set of my jaw, the steely stillness that had replaced my once eager smile. I hadn't married. I hadn't stayed in touch. No one called me Evie anymore. I was Director Sharp now, Division A5, and if the invitation was anything, it wasn't about family. It was a test, a performance. I looked at my reflection and nodded, not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because I needed to know if they'd still recognize me. As we drove through the familiar streets of Cleveland neighborhoods, I could still see the long-gone stores and weathered signs that had been there since I was a kid. We were almost at the venue, which was near the Federal Square, where the flag fluttered like a symbol of unity. I was dressed in black with no insignia or announcements. I wasn't there to cause a fuss, especially since the building was so intimidating. I could still hear her voice, my mother's voice clearer than the engine beneath me. It was 2017. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. There are people born to be remembered. She told a friend, and some people should know they're not. I never said a word. I just stood there frozen, and somehow that moment rang louder than any siren I'd ever heard. I arrived right on time, not a minute early, not a second late. The entrance to the Federal Civic Hall was polished to a mirror shine, a line of dignitaries already streaming through the metal detectors. No one waited for me. No one looked my way. I was a shadow in a place I used to belong. The reception table had a sign propped up in bold gold lettering, honoring the service of Fiona Sharp and Harold Sharp. Not a single mention of me, not even a line of courtesy. And yet I carried the same last name, I wore the same bloodline. Once I'd sat at the helm of an operation, whose success rewrote national threat protocols, an operation no civilian would ever hear. About I stepped forward to hand off my coat. The young logistics aide took it with a tight smile, then checked his list. Miss Sharp, was it? Are you sitting at table 12, which is for unscheduled guests? He said, his eyes narrowing. There was a woman who had babysat Fiona at a Vermont summer camp, and an old classmate who introduced himself 3 times to me as if I were a stranger each time. I was probably just as much of a stranger to them as they were to me. We were sitting at table 12, which was tucked behind the coffee station and barely 2 steps away from a recycling bin. I could hear the sound of the espresso machine and the sloshing of ice in the punch bowl. The room dimmed slightly as the stage lights came on. Then she walked in, Fiona-tailored navy blue dress, discreet diamond studs, confident stride like she'd rehearsed every step for maximum poise. She moved like this wasn't just her night but her coronation. She took the podium and smiled that calculated kind of smile politicians use. I'm deeply honored to be recognized alongside my father. I want to thank my colleagues, my mentors, and of course my family. Those who've stood by me through every decision, especially the ones that required grace and clarity. No one here ever let poor judgment interrupt progress. I felt it like a slap. That line, sweetly phrased, neutrally delivered, was a blade, and it was aimed straight at me. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Years of training made sure of that. I just picked up the glass of flat soda in front of me and sipped it like it didn't taste like spite. As her speech wrapped up, the room erupted in applause. I noticed my father clapping just slightly longer than the rest, his expression fixed and unreadable. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief monogrammed with Fiona's initials. Then it happened. A man in a sharply pressed FBI dress uniform started making his way through the crowd. His path cut directly toward my table. I recognized him instantly. Reed Carson, one of mine. I hadn't seen him since the final debriefing after Operation Sentinel. He stopped 2 feet from me, straightened up, and declared, "Director Sharp," with a voice that echoed across the room. "It is a privilege to meet you again. I was an underling of yours." I glanced up at Reed, didn't smile or stand, just met his gaze and gave the tiniest nod. "Thank you, Agent Carson." The room was dead silent. The women at my table froze mid-bite, mid-sip, and my father's hand stalled mid-clap. My mother's wine glass was tilted in her grip and almost spilled. He saluted, not exaggerated, just protocol, but in this setting it rang louder than any microphone. And in that single moment, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the missing daughter. The professional embarrassment, the one they never included in the family newsletter. I was Director Sharp. And they had to watch me be saluted publicly, visibly, unmistakably. Reed was waiting just beyond the velvet curtain in the dim glow of the hallway behind the auditorium. The air smelled like cologne old carpet, and the fading scent of catered hors d'oeuvres. But his face cut through it all, serious, unsiling. No longer the rookie agent I once mentored. His stance told me everything. This wasn't a courtesy call. "We've got a situation, Director," he said in a low voice. "There's been an unauthorized access of the WitnessNet system. The breach originated right here in the Cleveland office." My breath didn't catch, but my stomach tightened like a fist. WitnessNet was the encrypted backbone of our federal witness protection program. No leaks, no second chances. The stakes were too high for anybody to mess with that system. It might have affected witnesses, their families, spies implanted in criminal networks, and even individuals who vanished from sight, despite our assurances that they would never be discovered. Show me. In response to his request that I accompany him to a secure area close to the catering staging area, he presented me with an unlocked tablet. Reed had previously retrieved the access logs, so I began scanning the entries using my finger to trace the sequence of timestamps, locations, authentication tokens, and IP addresses. I was taken aback when I read that the device belonged to Fiona Sharp, an official from the downtown Cleveland satellite office. I carefully shifted my gaze towards him. How certain are you? 99%. Jaw tight, he said, but it gets worse. The token that was used to access the system belonged to Samuel Whitaker, a man whose name sent shivers down my spine. Fiona had gushed over him in multiple interviews, describing him as an unwavering pillar of legal integrity. Whitaker was a senior federal litigator, known for his sharp tongue and friendly demeanor in front of the camera. He had recently served as the lead prosecutor in a high-profile embezzlement scandal involving military contracts, and the public viewed him as a champion of truth. However, I couldn't help but feel that something was a little too staged. Why would Whitaker have credentials as a witness? I wanted to find out more from my own observations than from what I could read. He said, "But if this breach is connected to Fiona, she's either being used or carefully," he replied. "Someone is using her access as cover." I glanced at him and told him I was staying, and he blinked, confused about which pretense his family was employing. I responded with a dry tone, letting them believe that I had returned to reawaken a long-lost sisterhood. He let out a low-volume laugh, and I went back into the main hall saying, "It's not a lie yet, but it might become one." The lively discussion died down as I walked by Fiona, who had noticed me from across the room. Her eyes were sharp and penetrating, as if she could detect a change in my stance, and my mother, with a glass of champagne in her hand, came running over to meet me at the table. "Well," she replied in a fake, exaggerated voice, "isn't it funny that someone actually remembered you used to do something?" She wore that polished, semi-pleasant face that she usually does when confronted with disappointment. After maintaining eye contact for a moment, I grinned gently. The echo of her silence lingered behind me as I walked past her, reminding me that not everyone forgets their mothers. My thoughts were already racing, creating connections and calculating the risks. Now it wasn't about redemption, but about exposure, and Fiona, unaware of it or not, had become entangled in something far more perilous than family politics. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, watching Fiona's flawless camera-ready face fill the screen as the newly appointed representative of the Ohio Federal District. Her voice, confident and clipped, echoed through the room like a hymn of curated righteousness. The morning sunlight slipped through the thin blinds of my motel window, striping the dull carpet in gray and gold. The old television buzzed quietly from its corner, and the local news anchor smiled too brightly. The victims of government negligence deserve not just our words, but our action. I savored my hotel coffee as Fiona vowed to rebuild trust. A few minutes later, the section shifted to a compilation of interviews from the past, including one that caught my attention. Fiona was having a one-on-one chat with a podcast presenter from Washington, D.C. Her expression was composed and measured. She had previous experience working for the Department of Justice, and she smiled as she said it. However, Evelyn never quite fit the culture of accountability. I refrained from reacting negatively, and I didn't throw the mug away. I remembered seeing it before, even when my little sister sobbed in my arms on the way home from school from when the boys had called her a bug-eyed. I had been the one to confront them. After we divided up our responsibilities, I went to the local federal building while Reed remained behind to go over surveillance data. I took the punches and made her feel protected, but now she's using my name as a rhetorical device. I logged in using my old DOJ credentials, which garnered weird looks and forced grins but did not set off alarm bells. All I had was my name, some background, and a favor from a retired regional deputy who owed me a bottle of whiskey. Samuel Whitaker shook my hand so firmly it screamed overcompensation. His smile was too polished, and his eyes too focused. We sat down in the corner cafe on the first floor, surrounded by agents who pretended not to listen. "You must be Fiona's sister," he said. "She talks about you all the time, like you're a bit of a legend." I heard that, So he stirred his coffee with slow, deliberate circles. She brings so much joy to our company with her genuineness, honesty, and purity of heart. Some may find her a bit innocent, but that's actually a strength in our workplace. Director Sharp, no one manages to maintain their halo intact indefinitely, I remarked bluntly, and Whitaker grinned. His tone was light, but I caught the glint in his eye, the kind of glint men like him think they hide. Well, I didn't respond, just sipped my coffee. Let the silence stretch. When I stepped out of the building, my phone buzzed. Red sending something your way? You're not going to like it. The file arrived seconds later, a grainy video time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Whitaker exiting a parking garage, looking around like a man who knows better. Then from the shadows, a second figure emerged, tall, gay-haired, wearing a tan trench coat. Orson Gray, I hadn't heard that name in years. He was flagged in Operation Iron Maze as a logistics conduit for the Veil, one of the most elusive domestic syndicates we ever tried to pin down. Shell companies, encrypted transactions, deep ties to defense contractors and congressional staffers. We could never get him. He vanished in 2014 until now. Whitaker met with him, that smile of his. I could still see it as I closed the video and Fiona worked under Whitaker. I stared at the city skyline. From the sidewalk, the clouds breaking just enough to let some warmth in. One thing was becoming dangerously clear. If Orson Gay had emerged from the shadows, this wouldn't have been about treachery. It would have been about war. Fiona wasn't only near the breach, she stood in its shadow. At the abandoned Candela site, a long-lost FBI training facility now shrouded in secrecy, Fiona stood poised at the edge of the cracked asphalt, her blazer buttoned as if to protect her from what I was about to say. She hesitated at my sight, but I didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, I handed her a thick file, sealed in an old briefing envelope. This was the witness you were protecting, right? As Fiona lifted the cover, I beheld her eyes swiftly scouring the first page before flitting to the photo affixed to the cover, a blurry, time-stamped snapshot. In Mexico City, 2018, a guy wearing tactical gear pointed a firearm. Her jaw dropped as she studied the somber scene before her. Is that him? I whispered to her. He escaped the cartel and had critical intelligence, Whitaker had assured me. No, he's not a survivor. I countered that he was a commander and one of the highest-ranking operatives of the Veil. That man didn't flee the fire, he lit it. Fiona's face turned white, but we granted him full clearance and I gave my approval. I retrieved a small encrypted recorder from my coat and pressed play. Whitaker's voice came out clear and smug and deliberate. She is our most valuable pawn. We feed her just enough truth to keep her righteous. She is young and idealistic. The system will devour her before she even knows who she is protecting. The distance between us grew thicker. There was no place for softening here. Saving someone without questioning who dies as a result is not justice. So Fiona kept silent for a long time before speaking. When she did, her words were empty and uninformed. All she wanted was to rescue someone. Fiona, that's the abyss. Trembling, she turned to leave, her shoulders slumped and folding inward. Wait, she said. The same child I had comforted through her night terrors now standing crushed under the burden of her own good intentions. I approached her, reached into my pocket, and took out a tiny fitness tracker. I put it delicately around her wrist and asked, "What's this?" "Just a precaution," I said. "It monitors vitals and location." She gave me a sidelong glance before continuing. "You don't trust me. I trust you enough to try to keep you alive. That's more than I can say for the people you're working with." As her fingers brushed across the band, she remained silent and refused to remove it that night, even after the darkness had engulfed us. The body of Candela. Suddenly, Fiona's phone began to light up. With a controlled, calm, and practiced tone, Whitaker said, "I know who you met with today. Evelyn Sharp has a history of ruining people's careers. Seriously, you wouldn't think she'd risk her own sister to save her own?" For the first time since we were kids, Fiona's eyes were filled with fire instead of fear, and she squeezed her fist over the phone. I was skeptical when my mother called me 2 days ago, using an eerie voice, but I eventually agreed because sometimes the best way to find out what's really going on is to step right into it. They picked our old childhood home in Lakewood as the location. Even after rearranging the furnishings and cleaning the dining area, the lingering scent of lemon cleanser and frigid distance persisted. Harold, my dad, grinned broadly, but not so much that it met his eyes when he welcomed me. Fiona remained silent, exchanging a look that was both lengthy and piercing. Just before supper, I entered my former room, which hadn't belonged to me for more than a decade, but someone had painstakingly made it appear undamaged. The bed, bookshelf, and framed photo of me from the day I was sworn into the Department of Justice are all still there. On the desk, I noticed a dust line beneath the photo, which indicated that it had been placed there recently as a performance piece. I must admit I wasn't impressed. As I made my way back to the dining room, I paused at the hallway vent. My father's voice, trying to be quiet, murmured something about her being here and how I didn't want any part of it after tonight. It was confirmed that someone else had been working behind the scenes. The dinner was a show, with dishes like roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, and wine merlot, which none of us liked, but which they kept for appearances. They made conversation, though. "You don't have to hide anymore," Harold remarked, placing a huge envelope in the center of the table, while my mother brought up church and Harold continued talking about golf. Fiona, for once, remained mute until Harold cleared his throat. As I steadied my shaking hands, I peered inside the envelope. What I found inside were altered versions of real documents from witnesses, data manipulation, and forged internal memos. Envisioning myself as a courageous whistleblower who finds forgiveness by exposing wrongdoing, "Where did you get this?" "How long have you been following me?" I said, my voice as keen as the table's blades. Her voice quivered as she retrieved the health band from her bag and tossed it down the table as if it were a burning sensation. "I wasn't following you," I said, adding that I was only protecting you by bugging you with the surveillance gadget implanted in my wrist. "Just as I've always done, Evelyn is bringing your reputation back up by bringing me down," I said calmly, "cleaning up what the system overlooks, including you." That was when the lights cut out. Pitch black swallowed the dining room. A beat later, the front door exploded inward. The sound of splintering wood and boots on tile ripped through the house. 3 men entered, masked, dressed in dark tactical gear. Their rifles weren't raised, but their intent was unmistakable. Her one said, pointing directly at me, "She knows too much." And the rest asked another, gesturing toward Fiona and my parents, no longer useful. One of them moved toward me. I went with the motion, falling backward off my chair, hitting the floor hard, but not before my thumb found the sewn-in ridge under my sleeve, pressing the panic node stitched beneath the cuff of my blazer. My real failaf, I'd never counted on Fiona to wear the tracker forever. I knew she'd take it off eventually, either out of shame or anger. That's why I built Redundancy Layer 2 was embedded into the threat of my coat, designed to send a silent ping to read and trigger a geolocation beacon if activated under duress. The men didn't notice they yanked me up, roughly one pressing cold metal to the base of my skull. My mother screamed. My father raised both hands. Fiona stood frozen. "You thought we wouldn't find you?" As they snarled at me, they said, "Director Sharp, traitor to the cause." "I never joined your cause," I said with clenched teeth. "Exactly." Then, from outside, the screeching of signal jammers, the blaring of sirens, the flashing of tactical lights through the windows, all caused my trap to trip. At that very moment, just before the mayhem broke out, Fiona glanced at me. What I saw was a woman coming to terms with the fact that the battlefield had never been where she had imagined it to be. It had been at our dinner table, baked into the silence of a family that had never asked her why she believed what she had done, only who had told her to believe it. Upon receiving the emergency signal, Reed Carson took his time to summon backup. He had learned the hard way that not everyone in the Bureau could be trusted. Instead, he contacted encryption expert Maria Torres, who knew how to evade firewalls, and former Navy SEAL Daniel Park, who posed as, "What are we dealing with?" without asking any questions. In an unidentified SUV, Maria inquired, as they prepared to respond to the final signal from my gadget. In the midst of this, I found myself bound to a corroded support post in my parents' basement, and Reed spared no words about the network's superior knowledge of us compared to our own. What's more, our family was utilized as bait, despite their complete lack of knowledge. They weren't only there to frighten, one of them even recognized me among the duct tape military knots, low voices, and weaponry. You are the Sentinel Op, and I followed your missions. When you suddenly disappeared, I didn't blink. I wasn't just gone, I was chosen to disappear. He smiled behind his mask, which was nice, but now you're no longer invisible. Their plan wasn't to mercilessly murder us. That would have been too kind. Rather, they intended to use precise political maneuvering, explosives, and staging to bring us out as a domestic extremist cell. With a few doctored files and a fabricated manifesto, we would have become a warning headline. Nothing beyond us, no inquiries. The creaking of the old floorboards drew my attention. I waited for Fiona to speak, but she remained silent. Her expression could have been either fear or calculation, but I could tell she was still involved because of the crackling, coded voice that came from the device concealed in the collar seam of my coat. Evelyn's new information revealed that the mole was Victor Crane. Crank, the man I had previously prevented from being promoted due to his doctored evidence in a trafficking case, had been feeding them. According to Reed, he divulged your whereabouts and provided your father with those phony witness net files. Outside of the team's final preparation, everything made perfect sense. Crane knew the Bureau knew me, and most crucially, they knew how to use trust as a weapon. This time, it was Reed's voice. After 12 hours of wiring, the entire home is about to explode unless we take action. I glanced at the little, flashing light on the sleeve of my jacket. Beginning, not a promise, not a hope. The type of darkness that seemed older than night at 3:11 in the morning, the musty stench of mildew and perspiration in the basement, together with a more acerbic acid taste of plastic. My wrists ached from the rope friction, and I could feel my family breathing shallowly and too quickly behind me. Harold, for once, was silent, maybe because it finally dawned on him that he couldn't buy his way out of this jam. I blocked out the noise, focused on the stillness beneath, and counted down the seconds. In the subterranean receiver, Reed's voice, as serene as ever, echoed through the room. We're breaching from the north entrance. The lights will go out in 40 seconds. You have 90 seconds to reach and disarm the main charge. At this point, no one was guaranteed anything. We were already on the edge. 40 seconds later, the lights went out in the darkness. I slid the blade from my boot and worked the ropes 2 passes. With a snap, I rolled forward, slowly making my way to the water heater. There, I concealed a backup heat emitter, which I used to fool the motion detectors, and slip past the hallway. Daniel silently broke into the storm basement, breaking the communications of the curtain. Maria, who is located in a distant vehicle 3 blocks away, applied a patch to the plans. There are 3 V-shaped explosive nodes. They aren't your average charges. They're symbolic of the veil. I made it to the first node, which is behind the white washer wire, and... But there's a cross current, Maria warned, so you must immediately stop electricity to the center. I slashed no boom while still breathing, then slammed my still aching left hand, the one that had suffered a complicated fracture in Chicago, against the floor. Just as footsteps thundered down the stairs, a man burst into view. Rifle raised. I'd planned for this, switched my mother's antique pistol for a loaded Glock, and kept it hidden under a floor tile. I fired low into his thigh. He collapsed, howling. I moved in, tore off his mask. "Victor Crane, hello again," I said. He grunted. "You always thought you were better. That's why you burned me. You burned yourself." I said, "I just made sure you didn't take anyone else down with you," he sneered. "You'll never win this system. Doesn't want you. There's no place for people like you. Then I'll build a new system," I whispered. I turned back to the explosives, 2 more nodes as I disarmed the second. I felt someone behind me. I didn't turn. Going to die for people who never believed in you. My father's voice, I kept working, not for them. After I snatched the control unit from the crane, Fiona crouched down next to me and proclaimed, "You don't have to do this alone." As I turned off the last charge and the lights flared back above us, I finally saw her for who she really is. Not as the child who trailed after me or the woman who attempted to escape me, but as someone standing by my side, standing on her own 2 feet. I stepped out into the morning, my breath caught in my throat, and heard Reed's voice. We were in targets down, cleared, and he met me at the porch. "All safe," he said. I glanced past him at the black horizon, where the stars were dying over a ruined home. "No," I replied, "now it's safe to begin." After 10 days had gone since the house was cleared, the bombs were defused, and the lies, or at least some of them, came to light. I entered the congressional hearing room fully aware. No illusions, no armor, no tactical knots in my hair, no lowering of my eyes, and facing directly into the eyes of the system that had once attempted to erase me. Evelyn Sharp, Director, FBI Division of 5, was the nameplate that was placed before me. I began by asking a gentle but incisive question. Why do we equate quiet with guilt? I allowed the words to linger in the air like a tension building, and then I faced the chair of the Oversight Committee, the same man who had signed the order that had removed my authority years before, and I said, "When the system wants to bury someone, it doesn't need a trial, it only needs a rumor." Nobody budged, and I laid out everything they had tried to conceal. The files that Maria decrypted Reed's system of responsibility, the testimony of Fiona as an additional witness. I didn't stand there as a victim. Instead, I claimed to have been a part of the system, that I remained silent when I should have spoken, that I compromised under the guise of duty, and that responsibility is on me. I also didn't ask for reinstatement, but instead put forward a proposal that would be harmful to all the careerists present. A total overhaul of the witness net, with no political ties or re-election pressures whatsoever, and a transfer of supervision to an impartial civilian board. The last video I played came from a pin camera embedded in a lamp in Crane's office. It was grainy, but clear on his voice and face. It showed a cash transaction that went through a dummy shell connected to the Helix Foundation, a name that was once praised for border security policy, but is now revealed as the financial laundry room of the Vale. They arrested him in real time. He didn't fight it. Instead, he looked at me with bloodless, beaten eyes and said, "You win this time." He had occupied enough mental space for me to not answer. After the hearing, my mother came up to me in the hall and said, "If you're what the system couldn't look at, maybe I've been closing my eyes too long, too." There was no apology, just a single sentence. "If you're what the system couldn't look at." With no words spoken, my father presented me with a photo that bore a striking resemblance to the one I had worn at my initial interview with the Department of Justice. However, this particular snapshot had a brand new frame, and under it, inscribed in brass, were the words, "Evelyn Sharp never erased." I left Capitol Hill without applause or flashbulbs. What I carried instead was a new assignment, blueprinting a secure federal data network. This time not for glory, but for the forgotten, for the ones like me who had been buried under noise. Still breathing spring had turned warm in a small Arizona border town, the kind of warmth that felt earned. I stood on a makeshift stage in a public high school gym, sunlight falling across folding chairs and faded banners. They didn't introduce me as a former FBI director, just a woman who had walked through a system and returned with the truth. There were 130 graduates in front of me, fidgeting in gowns too big for their shoulders, eyes bright with questions. The world hadn't answered yet. I had no speech in my hands, no cue cards, just one line. Truth doesn't clap for you, it doesn't hand out medals, but it's the only thing that'll still be standing beside you when everything else falls away. I don't know if they understood what I meant, maybe they will one day. After the hearing, I didn't stay in DC, I refused the interviews, dealing with the documentary proposals, the memoir absent from the streaming service. "It's something you build slowly alone if you must," I told teens who believed justice was something you found in movies, as I walked away from the noise that had once enticed me and instead became a mentor, a quiet guide. I worked with NOSes, sat in on school boards, and taught risk assessment and ethical reasoning. And then one afternoon, Fiona's name appeared in my inbox subject line. I'm not scared anymore. She'd attached a photo, her standing on stage at a witness protection conference. Not as the case study, but as the speaker asking questions. Building structure not being used, I replied. I've always believed in you. But what matters more now is that you believe in yourself. That night, I sat in my little home office, the one without a flag. Without an intercom on the highest shelf was a sealed folder, the original veil file I hadn't turned it in. Not because I was hiding it, because I needed to remember, justice isn't a moment. It's a process. When people ask me what I do now, I just smile. I used to work in the system now. I stand outside of it so I can see it more clearly. I don't give speeches anymore. Not often, but sometimes when the sun sets behind the mountains and the sky goes that deep, impossible blue, I sit alone by the wooden fence out back. No one claps, no camera clicks, just silence mine. And this time, I'm not afraid of it. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is to stand quietly in the truth we fought for. Not all victories are loud. Some arrive in silence, in dignity, in choosing to begin again, this time on our own terms. If this story moved you in any way, I'd truly love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, or simply hit subscribe to stay connected. Your voice means more than you.